I believe authentic self-expression requires several qualities, one of which is vulnerability. I believe we have to, when we're hearing something that could be perceived as sensitive or that we're putting ourselves out there or people may think a certain way about us, that we find through faith and trust in this holy boldness the courage to come forth and to ask it. And certainly you may ask it a certain way, or you may put it out there a certain way, or maybe you just need to just blurt it out. And my experience has been when you do that, not that you do it because of that, but it always, for me, has opened the door for other people.
Hello there. My name is Duncan Autry, and you are listening to Fractal Friends, the podcast where we explore our self-similarity across our diversity. We all have a role to play in the whole, and the purpose of this show is to interview people with interesting perspectives on the world and see what it is that we can learn from each other. In this episode, I talk with the Reverend Dr. Diva Sunshine Michelle Coleman. Okay, she doesn't officially have her PhD yet, but that does not get in the way of the fact that she has a lot to teach us. Sunshine Michelle is a spiritual leader, a visionary, an academic, and a poet who is deep into her doctoral thesis about authentic self-expression of Black and Brown women. Her thesis inquiry is based on a sacred sister circle that she has been holding over the last year in Berkeley, California. In this conversation, which I'm calling Intersectional Transformation, we talk about finding your authentic self and the powerful rippling out of healing that can be created when someone expresses themselves with authenticity. And we acknowledge that this can also bring clarity to the relationships that are not working for us anymore. We talk about the intersectionality of oppression and liberation, Black feminist theory, and spirituality, and how they all intersect with one another. This is a timely conversation where we talk about navigating and calling in the profound transformation that the world is going through right now, and how that is reflected in our own personal transformation. We talk about forgiveness, holy boldness, oneness, the whispers of our ancestors, and so much more. I love how this episode is both spiritually and divinely inspired, while also being grounded, practical, and realistic. This is good medicine for those who are struggling with how to be in these times. Thank you for listening to Fractal Friends. If you like this show, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it, and please give it a review if you have a chance. Also, come visit fractalfriends.us, where you can get more information about Sunshine Michelle Coleman and the things that we discuss in this episode. There is particularly a great well of resources about Patricia Hill Collins, Black feminist, and intersectionality. Also, check out the archive of episodes, which are now organized by category. I'm super excited to say that it is now possible for you to support Fractal Friends. You can make a donation through PayPal, or you can become a patron of Fractal Friends through Patreon, where you can subscribe to make a contribution for each episode. You can find buttons to make contributions at fractalfriends.us. And one last thing before we get started. I'm professionally dedicated to helping the world improve its capacity to communicate across our differences. At my company, Spoke and Wheel, we work with teams, companies, organizations, and groups to help them transform their relationship with conflict and with each other. If you know teams or groups that need support to be able to be happily and effectively working together towards their life-affirming purpose, please send them my way. We offer free initial calls at our website, spokeandwheel.co. That's spokeandwheel.co. This episode of Fractal Friends was recorded in August of 2020. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Reverend Sunshine Michelle Coleman. Sunshine Michelle, I am so glad to be talking to you today on Fractal Friends. I really appreciate having you in my life as this wonderful intersection as like a colleague and a friend, an elder, and someone I just really respect a lot. And I look forward to this conversation. I just think that the perspective that you bring and the perspective that you've been developing through your academic work is really important, and I think it's just super relevant for these times. And I appreciate both the heart and the practice that you bring into your life. So I just wanted to start by just giving you a chance to introduce yourself and kind of say, how you describe yourself in this world.
Sure. And thanks, Duncan. I appreciate your invitation to come onto your show. I'm really honored to be able to share with you as well. I am a native Bay Arean, born in Vallejo, California, raised in Berkeley. Back in the day when Berkeley was still probably is considered pretty radical, doing things on the front line. And I'm an only child and have been here in the Bay Area all my life, except for about 7 years when I was in Southern California. So basically, I've only been in California.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to stay here. And I straddle two worlds, which are all worlds. I believe in oneness. And by that, I mean, I've worked in the corporate business, nonprofit, even industries, fields for years and years, while simultaneously for years and years, I've been deeply immersed in the spiritual world. And that's where I lead from. Have found over the past block of years the way to bring all of me, and which leads with my spirituality, into all sectors. So that's been really important introduction to my work of authentic self-expression, which is my passion, is how do I show up in mind, body, and spirit to any and everything that I do. And that's what I feel is the gift that we all bring, because we're here for a reason, or else we wouldn't be here. And we all have our own unique signature that's unique just to us. And so we might as well just show up as fully as we can, whatever that is at the moment, to live our purpose, even if we don't know what that is. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. If you want me to say more or anything else, I'm happy to.
That's a great start. I just really want to lift up like this theme of like authentic self-expression. It's, something that I think about a lot, and also personally, like think about, I saw this talk recently called like the art of being you, or the art of being yourself. And this woman, she specifically helps people like find their authentic self-expression. And she says like the thing that is the same about all of these people is that they're all totally different, because each of us have our own signature, and figuring out what that signature is and kind of trusting that and then sharing it. Those are big moves in life. I think that we'll see that as a theme in this conversation because, there's interestingly like a lot of barriers to that self-expression, or people, with both trusting that they have it, finding it, and then getting it out there. So I also know that this is part of your doctoral thesis work, and I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us a bit about the circle that you've been holding and where you have been like specifically working on exploring, inquiring about self-expression.
Yeah, sure. And just listening to you, Duncan, what comes to my mind first before I get to my work is we're in such a capitalistic, patriarchal society that's crumbling. I'm just knowing it's crumbling and we're moving into something different. We have to do that in order for it to work for all of us. But being in that space, we're led to believe like it has to look like something in particular. Like if we're not represented like X, even our family does that. Like it has to be this or it has to be that. And if it's not, then it's this over here, which is less than. And that's why I believe, kind of summed up, people are reluctant to show like who they are and what they're thinking because they feel like they'll be judged a certain way. Kids grow up, unfortunately, with peer pressure. And even as adults, we have peer pressure. If we don't show up a certain way, then we're not accepted and we're rejected and all of that. And so I believe authentic self-expression is the antithesis of that. And what my doctoral work is exploring is the empowerment of authentic self-expression within Black and brown women in particular. And the way it's framed is U.S.-born women of African, Latinx, and/or indigenous descent. And ironically enough, a couple of years ago, when I was narrowing my theme so that I could, get into who I was going to explore this with and as, because the way I see it, let me just interject for a moment. I'll come back to that. The way I see it is that this work for me in my heart. It started with me and my own work on my own self, and which was through trauma, and it was through heartache and pain, and I felt like I was suppressed and not necessarily depressed, but I wasn't expressed, I noticed, mainly because of the way I was showing up in the world, and I thought that people would think of me. And then that became more of a curiosity, like I would think something for, let's say, in a group or in a meeting, and not say that because I felt like it would be seen as odd, or why are you asking that, or provocative, or whatever. But as I did my spiritual work, I kept exploring that within myself, and then I kept testing it out and doing those things that I was hearing, which I call faith. That I would just have faith and trust that it was okay, and that I'm okay, and this is what I have to bring. And the more I did that, even though sometimes it was hard because people did think of me a certain way or whatever, but I learned to not care about that. I had to learn to put myself first and put them second, third, fourth, or even not at all, in order to stand more fully in who I am. And so that's how the curiosity was born within me. And the way I see it is not only within, well, let me say it differently. The way I see it is for people in particular of what I call social identity, and the world calls difference, but I think none of us are different. We're all unique. We're all different for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, so I try to stay away from that word difference. Anyone with social uniqueness, or that is in a non-normative identity or intersectionality, like gender, race, physical ability, sexual orientation, class, economics, it goes on and on. So I believe my theories that were burgeoning applies to all those categories. In particular, that's where my curiosity was. But as I began to narrow the field work and what population would I look at, I reflected back on myself. Duh, you're a woman of African descent, born in this country. So that's how I narrowed on U.S. born, and in particular, Black and brown women. Certainly that's to the exclusion of other women, but I was in particular curious about that because I fit into that group. And it was ironic because it was a couple years ago before social unrest for Black and brown people have gone on for so long, but so much more so now, as we know, it's heightened. And when I narrowed this was before the social unrest that we're experiencing right now.
Right.
So as I look at this work right now and look at the interesting experiences of Black and brown women born in this country, is a whole unique perspective than other groups. So that's how I got started with it.
There's so many ways I want to go with this. And well, one, I just want to just flag that in a conversation I had with Ashanti Branch in another podcast interview, he works with young boys, and we talked about this idea of theme of like being cool and like needing to fit in, and how that totally spills over into adulthood. And we don't necessarily try to be cool, but we're doing something. And maybe it's like being professional, or maybe it's being whatever, but just like that way that we're suppressing our own expression because we don't think it's what other people are going to want. It's just fascinating that this is something that we carry with us. What I also appreciate, though, is like we're drilling into this, like, as you focus your academic inquiry into the experiences of Black and brown women and authentic self-expression. I had the joy of like getting deep into Black feminist scholarship, as I've been preparing for this. And, it's like really understanding that there's an experience that's happening here that's like not just the experience of women in feminism that feminism is helping with, and not just the experience of Black rights and racial justice, or that there's like something that is both the combination of these things and also something that's even more, there's something even more significant there and unique. And that's also interesting because each of us in our authentic self is some sort of intersection of things, which makes us each in a way be our own intersectional, unique, authentic self. In my like research, I like ran into learning a lot about Patricia Hill Collins. She talks about this creating spaces like self-definition and just like this like, importance of like one being able to just name their own reality. And that she talks about this idea of like creating spaces for Black women, or in this case, for Black and brown women, where like self-definition is like not crowded by other faces that are objectifying or defining it, to create this space for like us, like freedom to be like, if we're not having men here and we're not having white folks here and we're not having our bosses here, like in this like specific space that you're creating in your work, I mean, I imagine that you're like part of what you're finding is that you're creating space for something to flower in these women that maybe wasn't going to happen out in the world when they're like trying to live in the systems that they're in. And I guess I'm curious, for whatever ways you're able to share, what are some of the things that you see blossoming in this space that you're creating for, Black and brown women to be amongst Black and brown women in a conscious like space?
Thanks for the way you asked that, because I was so caught up in the last response, I did not respond to the circles that you asked me about.
Oh, it's fine.
The work that I'm doing, the method that I used for this exploration that I described was through what I call the Sacred Sister Circle. So there were 9 of us, including myself, because I used what is called a participatory action research practice, which takes the researcher from out there into in here. And so we co-create the space together. And I've conducted and convened sister circles for many years on my own, not just for Black and brown women, but for women in general. And so when Spirit whispered in my ear to use this as the method, I was really excited by that. And so the 9 of us participated in a Sacred Sister Circle over a 7-month period, meeting once a month, so for 7 times. And to your current question of what am I seeing blossom, the beauty of this has been the researched knowledge, because I have it ingrained within my spirit. But to be able to research and find like tangible evidence of the benefits of sacred circles. We hear these days about restorative justice circles, and we hear, the indigenous people have done circles like forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. This is not new. And so, but to integrate it into a research practice is beautiful. I mean, I thought it was just magnificent that Spirit thought to do that. And so what we're realizing is our roots. We're realizing more of who we are. We're realizing how we heal in group and in community. We're able to come together in sacred ritual. There was lots of ritual and ceremony, and be able to support one another and learn from one another, and to express as ourselves, and even to find like what that means, because that's a self-reflective type of practice. To really, only you can say who you are,
right,
and who you want to be. And the way I've heard the work is to really, it's a self-reflective practice that I theorize has to come from a spiritual place. Not religious, spiritual, some connection to a higher power that allows you to look within deeply to reconcile with what comes up. Because I surmise that this is not an easy work necessarily, if you're going to be honest with yourself, that things come up that if you're willing to work with, that you can work through. And then you face off with yourself. You express authentically with yourself first, and then come into express outwardly from that place of authenticity. And I believe that there's a vibrational healing resonance that happens that has been researched as well, called morphic resonance. There's a variety of folks that have talked about that, but I hear it differently. It's a vibrational resonance, and I hear it in community, that I believe as two people express authentically, that in that place, and that could be difficult conversation, that could be hard. And when you come to it that way, there's a healing that happens out in the world. It ripples out. And that's what we need. That's what we need everybody to bring who you are. And we can learn from that, like an appreciation of what that is and who that is. And then I'll stop. And I want to say, though, that I actually created a theory in my work called the IDC factor, or the I don't care factor. And it speaks to what I said earlier, is learning how to not care what others think of me. Now, that doesn't mean we don't care. Of course we care. Putting ourselves first so that we can stand in our power, and other people can reconcile with that if they have an issue with it. So what we experienced in Circle, Duncan, was just, appreciation of one another, of each other's wisdom, of support, of slowing down, of needing self-care, of coming to community and revealing, the things that can be in the in-between that we can benefit from.
I kind of want to dig into a little bit about this theme of ritual and just even our intentional space and circle of which is such a powerful ancient process. And I hear because one on their own can develop their own IDC factor. I'm gonna go and just be mean. I don't really care what other people think about it. But that's not always easy. So I noticed that also by creating this space, both intentional, in a way, safe container that's or structured. And I guess the ritual contributes into this. And then also being amongst peers where there's at least some sort of common thread of, even though we're all unique, all these women are unique, they're still having some sort of shared life experience that allows them to lower the baseline for what they care about is already an easier bar to clear. Does that make sense? This idea that, it's wow, I don't really have to care what my husband thinks because he doesn't know what the heck's going on here. Or I don't have to care what other people think. And so then you're allowing space for that healing in this container. And then, of course, it's still going to ripple out because now it's changing their lives, changing each other in that group. And then, I get to benefit from it because I get to be in community with you. I guess the role of that container and ritual, I guess I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts on that.
So there's a lot that's running through here. I think as people learn to stand in their own power and to identify what they need and what they want, then that could have, maybe not, but could have an impact on how others perceive that person and how they receive that person and they interact with them. Mm-hmm. So let's say I realize that I'm intimidated by talking to Susie. And every time I get ready to, either she rubs me the wrong way or or she doesn't get me or she's misinterpreting me or there's something. But every time I go to say something about it, I get nervous and I don't. Mm-hmm. And I'm the one who suffers with that because she may not even know. And it's me that's having consternation and anxiety. But to the degree that I can do the self-reflection and what I was saying earlier and get to the root of why am I nervous, what's intimidating, what is it that I need, and that I come to find out that, I really need to have a conversation with her so that I can feel better understood and so that our relationship can at least go better. Now, it could be that Susie might get defensive. You can't control what somebody else is going to do. And I think that's why people have a problem coming on the real because they may be rejected. People get defensive. It could be all sorts of things. But let's say that Susie has a space of openness and I find the strength within myself and the courage to say what it is I need to say to her. Then we can perhaps have a conversation. And to the degree that we can have that conversation, then it opens up that space. I may not care. I may learn to not care what she thinks about me because it took so much courage for me to even stand up to say what it is that I need. And I can have strength and fortitude in that. And it can go beyond that because then even if Susie does get defensive, she might go away and then she might reflect on it herself. And then come back to the conversation and apologize and say, well, I thought about what you said and can you tell me a little more or whatever it is? And then we get somewhere. And then the relationship and the dynamic can shift because I've now stood into who it is and how I am and here's what I bring. And I've impacted this person seeing me differently, and therefore she reacts to me differently or interfaces with me differently. That's nurturing for me and the relationship. And then she learns she gets something out of it too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that dynamic of the flower opening and it budding. Could go the other direction. And perhaps that person, this may be a hard pill to swallow, but maybe they didn't need to be in my life. Like if Susie is going to be defensive and not hear what I have to say or not own that I was offended by what she had to say, then perhaps I need to shift my relationship with Susie and not have her there.
Right. Yeah, I got this nugget of wisdom a couple months ago that really was a tricky one for me. And it was, if everyone likes you, then you're not being yourself. If you're
Yeah.
truly being yourself, then there's a bunch of people out there that probably aren't going to like you very much. And I was like, are you sure? Because I wanted to be my full self and have everyone like me. And I noticed that there was like a crazy, like two-sided delusion there that like either that means that I think that I am so amazing that like everyone's going to like me or somehow, yeah, or just like I've made myself be too flexible and adaptable of like who I can be. So I appreciate that that it can go both ways. But I would say on the whole, there's this sense that, at least my experience is that when the more authentic that you are, people dig it. Even if they don't necessarily like what you're saying, they can connect with it. And I appreciate how like the way this fits into the ripple out. So like you being more authentic, like help Susie be more authentic, and then Susie is now more authentic with the people that she's with, which it makes me think about just like the way that we ever get to make change or transformation in this world is by just making it look way better than like whatever the status quo is, And so, you can imagine that someone seeing someone who has been moved by finding their own sense of self-expression, that impacting other people and being like, I want to be more self-expressed.
Yeah, and they might not even be able to admit it to you, but if you employ the IDC factor and, like you deal with you and come as real as you can from your own perspective every moment of the day, you never know how you're going to impact somebody else, whether they're in your life or not. Or maybe they go out of your life and they come back and they say, I just have to say, you're one of my strongest teachers in my life. And you're like, what? I didn't know that. And they tell you why. It's because you're always real. I've heard people say that to me, but it's not necessarily, sometimes it's an unpopular point of view that, or place to come from, because, and I find that I was always vocal in groups and I still am. And, some people just, and you get kind of put to the side or whatever. And then somebody in the hallway would say, they wouldn't say it in the room, but they'd say it in the hallway, one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate what you said. It's like, how come you didn't say it back there? It's because they don't have the same courage, perhaps, that I had been looking within myself to glean.
And it all makes a difference. There's something about this, this idea about like, I didn't feel okay to do it in there. And it's like a white man talking to a black woman, like there's an edge here where I notice that I'll just go for it. Like,
we're about going for it. Come on, Dustin,
exactly. That there's an experience that's valid of being like, wow, I didn't actually feel safe to speak up in this space. And that experience is real. And like that might be, and it's like something that's learned from living in systems and cultures of oppression and all these different ways. Like this has to do with like part of that, like that unique experience of being in like an intersectional space, right? That, what's the right question here? Like one of the things that I found to be really interesting, again, like, learning about like Black feminist scholarship and theory and such, as Black women sort of finally spoke up, they were saying like, hey, there's something that we're experiencing here that's not being touched on here. And academia was like, oh no, we already covered that. We already did racism. We already dealt with sexism. And it's like, no, there's something more here. And there's something about being able to say like, this is actually our experience. And like our experience is relevant, in this conversation. like in this moment, and I one thing I also learned in this is that the Black Lives Matter movement was started by 3 queer women, Black
Mm-hmm.
women, and like it's very intentional, like a very intersectional approach that they're taking. And oftentimes they're like, fighting for it's like white supremacy, patriarchal society. What are some messages that the world needs to be hearing and is actually beginning to hear that maybe that hasn't felt safe to say up until now?
So you touch on a couple things. One of the other things I forgot to bring in that you've said several times, and let me mention it here, is that as my theoretical framework in my doctoral research, and by the way, I try to stay away from the word research and researcher because it has usually meant for women and people of color being studied or being experimented on in being used in ways uh, that are not cool. And so I use the word inquiry, which you've used already, and I an initiating inquirer, and I'm a co-inquirer with the sister circle. And I use as the critical theoretical framework what I call women of color's feminism that you're referring to, Black feminism that first came during the time of the eras of early feminism of, well, hey, wait a minute, where are we in this picture? And as Black women started to rise up to bring in the intersectionality of, which you and I were talking about before the program, there's other intersections that happen. And that's why Black feminism spread to also include sexual orientation and ableism and or physical ability and all the other ways where people are oppressed and marginalized. So that is my framework that I use, and it's not just Black feminists. I call her Mother Anzaldúa, Gloria Anzaldúa. I don't know if you know who she is, who was a Chicana lesbian feminist, and she's an idol. So there's others that are speaking into this space, and a lot of the indigenous scholars. I just heard a talk by Sherry Mitchell. There's so many that are a part of this space as well, and it brings us into like other ways of knowing. It's nonlinear. That's what we need to know today. We need to know that there's other ways of thinking, and actually, thank God for that, or thank Goddess, thank who, the divine, because our limited ways of thinking as humans has got us where we are right now, and we need to be thinking broader, and there are other ways of knowing, and the people of color have always tapped into the other realms. And as a matter of fact, what makes my work so unique is that I have experience with, that I cite very specifically, the Archangel Michael, who talks about all the time authentic self-expression and authenticity and the imbalance of the masculine and the need for feminine energy in this world to help balance out, and the need for diversity and what have you. And that was an unexpected but welcome whole parallel source of data that came to me that I was drawn to and magnified. And it just shows that there's other ways of knowing. If I open myself up to spirit and say, show me and use me, I'm being used, but you have to listen. I think that's something that we don't do as humans because we feel like we know it all. We're in control. We know. We think we know. We don't know anything. And when we open ourselves up and say, show me, and then the answer comes, then we need to listen and obey that and move in that direction. So that's why I am where I am with this work. This is not my PhD at all. This is Spirit's PhD that I'm answering the call. I'm only doing what I'm hearing. And if we all did what we were hearing and listened deeply, then we'd be in a whole nother place.
And I was like preparing for this interview yesterday and slipping into that liminal space of falling asleep and which is where all the magic comes through. I was thinking about intersectionality and spirituality, and just like they start to blur together in this way that just as like we are this like intersection of like mind, body, and spirit, like the way we approach the world gets to be like practice and academics and spirituality, become this like intersection point. And it's like, as soon as we start asking this question, just like Black feminism did, is like, look, once we start looking at these couple things, like, wait, what about queer, and what about different bodies, and what about all these different perspectives? Like, okay, let's just take that to the next level. Like, what about being at the intersection of a body and a spirit, and let's bring that perspective in, and then let's bring in our ancestors, and let's bring in the future next generations, and like all these pieces start coming together, and it's like, then we just realize that like we're these each kind of unique nodes of transformation that are happening at this like very special intersection. And so I just really appreciate how you connected that, and how you are connecting these, and how you're inspiring this kind of connection. And it's like part of the authentic self-expression as well. And so I guess I'd be interested in, maybe that's a good question. Like this sense of like, you're finding your own voice, but you also are now a medium for the voice of spirit to be talking through you, uniquely through you. When we're talking about self-expression, we're also, like, I've even heard you talk about like you're speaking through your ancestors are speaking through you. This like self, but the self is like way bigger than just you. But yet, I don't know. Is this making sense? Like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
it makes sense. And this is not new. This is where our people come from. And when I say our people, our indigenous people, Black and brown people in particular, that's why I was so fascinated to work with my own group. It's a part, and I've always been one that's connected to the elders, and when they move to the other side, I pray to them. I always acknowledge my angels and my ancestors every day. And I thank them for being in front of me, behind me, on either side, above and below, that they guide me and they show me, and that they lead me and they whisper to me. And to listen to that, that's where that comes from. It's not linear. That's why I say it's much broader than this linear perspective. And this is not new. So in the Sacred Sister Circle, we're taking a format that is age old and current, and we're opening ourselves through ritual, through altars, and through practices that are honoring and that are sacred. This is where we find what my Grammyo, I called her, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. I was interviewing her once, and not interviewing her, I was talking to her, and she told me about the term holy boldness. She didn't to call it a term, she just said it, and I appropriated it totally.
Holy boldness?
To be wholly bold, yes. And in her mind, it was being wholly bold in God, that all things can be done in God. There's nothing that can't be. And that's one of my favorite terms. And that's the way I'm able to be my true authentic self, by being wholly bold. And one of the ways I meant to say earlier, especially when you said you were kind of struggling with like what to say and how to ask it, and wondering if there was a fear as a white man asking this Black woman this question. I believe authentic self-expression requires several qualities, one of which is vulnerability. I believe we have to, when we're hearing something that could be perceived as sensitive, or that we're putting ourselves out there, or people may think a certain way about us, that we find through faith and trust in this holy boldness the courage to come forth and to ask it. And certainly you may ask it a certain way, or you may put it out there a certain way, or maybe you just need to just blurt it out. And my experience has been, when you do that, it opens not that you do it because of that, but it always, for me, has opened the door for other people. Like, I was in a group the other day, you and I were in a group, and I just started sobbing. And the facilitator didn't know, or wasn't thinking like that. And I asked and said, can we just hold on for a second? I just need a moment. But I did that in group. And I was on Zoom. I could have taken myself off video, stayed on mute. I didn't do that because I was in community, and I'm taking a risk, and I'm being my full self. And what it did was open the pathway for others to express the same about grief. We're living in such a time. And when I show up fully with what I'm hearing, then I can bring my full self to the table, and so can everybody else. So trust and faith and openness and willingness, we can choose to be unhappy, Duncan, all we want. We don't have to change. That's the thing. We can be miserable all we want. But if you choose to live a life that is on the divine path and that is enlightened and that we are answering the call or what have you, then we'll be doing things differently. And that's what this work is all about. Not an easy work.
Absolutely not.
So worthwhile, though.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I just want to publicly really thank you for that, like that moment. It was this, this moment of us just, like reflecting on just how we're all isolated and but, like we're having this connection through computer screens and like your tears there were so powerful and it moved me. Like I found myself sobbing, like, and actually letting myself feel just how scary and insane this moment is, which was something that in just my day to day, I've just been rolling with it and just like whatever. And so you're letting that move through you, gave it space for it to move through me.
And let me just say that the main reason I was able to do that is that I'm in touch with this authentic self that I'm telling you about, and I've nurtured it and I've honed it for so many years that it's just right there at the ready. I didn't have time to think about, oh my God, what are people going to say? I even made a joke. I said, I put makeup on today. Once I collected myself, I kind of came back in with a sense of humor. I could have, being the diva that I am, said, oh my gosh, let me go off video. I'm all emotional and I'm a wet rag. And I didn't. It wasn't that, because I was feeling so grounded with my community and with the hard part, Duncan, is sometimes we're at the table where we don't feel welcome. You mentioned earlier where sometimes we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And those are times that we need to take into consideration cautiously. But even then, if it's not safe for you to speak to what's real for you in the moment, maybe you allow yourself to get to a safe space and then address it.
Yeah.
But that's where the authenticity comes in. It's like wherever you are and whenever it makes most sense, you come with that. And that's why the Me Too movement grew so much. People didn't come up, but they didn't let it come up early on. But then when one person found that courage to speak it forward, then other people found that courage too.
Yeah. I appreciate that intersection, of this, both like, the cultivating that personal power, like I can be more courageous to express myself in more spaces. And when you're in the right container, that container, that container can hold you. And there's like this little bit of like this both and there. Hi, Fractal friends. Sorry for the interruption. I'll keep this one quick. So are you part of a team or a group or an organization? I bet that you are. Actually, I bet that you're part of a few of them. Whatever your purpose is, I know that for you to be successful, you need to be able to count on the web of relationships that hold you together as you work towards your mission. It's hard sometimes to find a balance between being effective, acting decisively, and getting things done on one hand, while also cultivating a safe, caring, joyful, and collaborative environment on the other. But it is vitally important that your group both strikes and sustains that balance between people and purpose. So how's your team doing? Are you getting along? How are you adapting to the changing context that we're all in? Is your team struggling to work together to achieve its life-affirming purpose? If so, I would love to talk to you. In my company, Spoke and Wheel, we call ourselves the workplace relationship experts, and we believe that great relationships are what drive great organization. Whether you're part of a big company or a small startup or something in between, we've got you covered. Or maybe you're part of a group or organization that's working for political and social change. We've got that covered too, through our partnership with Mediators Beyond Borders International. And as a bonus, we are designed to work with remote teams in a 100% virtual environment. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you are ready to transform your relationships and get your crew to be happily moving in the same direction again, we're here for you. Come on over to spokeandwheel.co and schedule a free call with us. Again, that is spokeandwheel.co. And now, back to the show. It's like the combination of the brave space and the safe space. Well, a moment ago, you were like mentioning about, we were talking about like the voices coming through and we had ancestors. And I know that like something that's been coming through for you lately has been poetry, which is a new experience for you. Maybe I don't think you even still yet consider yourself a poet, but the ancestors are being poets coming through you. And I know that you have something here that you might be able to share. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to do that and tell us kind of what that experience was of it coming through.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. And I want to correct something that I thought I heard you say back to me. Like when I mentioned the Archangel Michael, he has not been speaking through me, but through someone that is a part of a team that I'm in. That, so I have had conversations with him, but he's not coming through me. But nonetheless, it's a magnetic attraction because he has had things to say to me directly. Like, Sunshine Michelle, I need you to do this. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that.
Appreciate that.
I was given, and goes into deep listening. Like I've had several what turned out to be poems recently drop, download. I get these divine downloads because I'm listening. And then you have to take it a step further and jot it down. If you're anything like me, you'll forget. And so I was given the opportunity at this diversity forum they were having this poetry slam. It was virtual. They put us into these groups and said, okay, we want you to get creative. Here's a poetry template. In 10 minutes, come up with your own poem and then share it amongst your breakout group. And instead of using the template, I just breathed in and just listened to what Spirit was saying to me. And this is what came up. And it turned out, I think, to be a bit of poetry called I Am a Whisper from My Ancestors' Hearts. I am a whisper from my ancestors' hearts, the sweet song of pride, love, and harmony, my Gramio seated in my soul, her notion to be wholly bold, to be courageous, introspective, and have a deep trust in God, to be the best me that I can be, always. I am a whisper from my ancestors' hearts, to listen deeply to God's signature of me, that unique impression that allows for total authentic expression from deep within my soul's calling. I am a whisper from my ancestors' hearts, filled with compassion and drive to reach and expand, to touch and lift, to trust and gift, to receive God's full bounty, to know the knower within that fills me up to the brim and overflowing. I am a whisper from my ancestors' hearts, to live my life full out so that I may become an inspiring ancestor of the next generation, to lift them to higher heights and greater horizons. Despite the trials and tribulations of our people, we are resilient and thrive, regardless of the shackles, disparities, injustices, and such. I am a whisper from my ancestors' hearts. I am the me that is we, that is us as community, our greatest multiplicity as oneness.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for doing the deep listening.
Yeah.
I think I want to explore a little bit about this idea you've mentioned it a couple of times of oneness. It comes up in this poem. And so help us unpack this oneness, but then unique, authentic self-expression. So I'm my unique self and we're part of this oneness. There's kind of been a joke in the last couple episodes about how even talking about this topic is almost impossible to do with language because you can't say both sentences at the same time. So we're both one and we're individuals. So I'm curious what your experience is with that.
Well, I'll start with what's coming up, and I didn't say in my introduction, I'll qualify it in a moment. Oneness is not sameness, that there is multiplicity and diversity in oneness. That's why we would say each blade of grass, each grain of sand, each leaf on a tree is different. That even identical twins are different. But we're from the same substance. I kind of see it as, and it was interesting to read in one of my pieces of literature as I'm doing my writing, where she said the same thing. Is like, you've got to be kidding. I mean, I thought that was an original thing. And we come from that same one mind. What I've always said for a long, long time, at least, is that I'm divinely connected. It's like the divine umbilical cord. It's like each one of us is tethered to the divine. and we are nurtured and fed from that place of oneness, yet we're each individual. And it was Sherry Mitchell that said the umbilical cord. She didn't quite say it like that. It was like, cut it out. But anyway, what I was going to qualify is that I'm an ordained New Thought minister, and I've been in the New Thought movement for decades. And even within a spiritual movement that honors multiple and various religious and spiritual philosophies, there's been some debate around this idea of oneness and it being sameness. And so from a racial disparity perspective, even in the movement, there's been challenge of people, white people in particular, who feel like, can't we just all get along? And, it's like, we're all the same. We're part from this. That's bypassing. There's a term for that. That's called spiritual bypass. That's ignoring what's real. We're not all the same, but we're from the same oneness. But it's like, or else I would be here and I would look just like you. We would all be, some of these, I love sci-fi movies. We'd all be, the Borg.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all look the same. We'd all have the same colors, the same everything. Everything's the same, and that's not who we are. So I think it's very clear, but people get it twisted. Oneness is not sameness, but it's beauty because it's infinite possibility in what is incorporated into oneness. And I believe the divine is always creating. It's always co-creating. It's limitless. So that oneness expands into infinity. It never stops.
Yeah. For me, this touches on, some of the most profound things that we could possibly, sit with. I recently had the most mundane location spiritual experience. That's in this airport restaurant, and it really struck me this idea that whoa, we are just one universe, and then we have diversified into so many crazy different things. I was just insane amount of. I was eating. It was I think a New Orleans themed restaurant. And I was just thinking about, man, what does it take for Cajun food to come into existence with French and just this history, and then just the server giving me food, and just to hold all of it, just the chaotic diversity of existence, just the drive of life to just keep on going and going and just populate, just changing and changing, and at the same time for us to all be one. And it's it's really tempting to want to simplify that, but it's not.
Right.
It's how can we hold just this incredible abundance of life and existence, and to all be of the same thing? Definitely all of us on this planet, we all were a star once. We're all just. And I also love that you can come to oneness from so many paths, right? You can read the Bible, we're this thing that God created. Go through science, and you can find just we're one universe that basically exploded. And then you can find it through any religion. You can find this path to oneness and some sort of understanding of how we're in this diversity, and that's the most amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who worked,
it's just like the name of your program, Fractal Friends. I mean, when you think of it, I'm sure that had something to do with it. When you think of a fractal, when you think of quantum physics, when you think of being able to witness and realize something into manifestation, and bring it from the invisible to the visible, this is all that.
Yeah.
This is that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly why it's called Fractal Friends. That. We're this super infinitely complex yet self-similar thing. So, I mean, you and I have extremely different life paths, and and life experiences, and yet there's a million things here that we can relate to each other about. And the
Right.
premise of the whole episode is that anyone who's going to be listening to this, whoever they are, is going to be able to find something from your life experience. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This actually inspires me. So something I found when I was doing research about, again, the Patricia Hill Collins, and just, she's amazing, by the
I'm
way.
so impressed that you did this research. See, that's how we're impressing each other.
Exactly.
That's so great.
Exactly.
I love her.
So her inspiration to get into intersectionality was from a quote by someone named June Millicent Jordan, who was a Caribbean American poet, essayist, and activist. And the quote is this: "Freedom is indivisible, or it is nothing at all, besides sloganeering and temporary, short-sighted and short-lived advancement for a few. Freedom is indivisible, and either we are working for freedom, or you are working for the sake of your self-interests, and I am working for mine." This idea that like fighting social injustice is not just about any specific race or class or gender or identity, or this is for a better society for one and the freedom for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something just like, what does it take for us to like actually get into solidarity with like everyone's freedom? And it's kind of born out of that. And especially because we're all just, again, there's like one thing that is super diverse. And then something I was going to say a minute ago, like it's, that's also like the source of conflict as well. Like,
Yeah.
is that like, okay, well, I want to be in relationship with you. We're interconnected. Okay, now we're different. You have a different view of things. Now we have that the friction that's going to happen. And that's fine. That's just what we do. But it doesn't have to be a bad experience. It
Right.
just means that it's going to be a little crunchy sometimes. And like, anyways, but this like when we're fighting for anyone's liberation, we're fighting for everyone's liberation.
Yeah. Before the program, you told me about, I hadn't heard her say this, but Patricia Hill Collins also said flexible solidarity. And I think that's what you're talking about. And it embraces that we're, the multiplicity, I believe. I mean, if I had to make it up, I need to read what it is that she said about it. But,
Yeah.
there's, and speaking of intersectionality, I had told you about where I know the term is in its from several feminists have said it, including Patricia Hill Collins, but in particular Kimberly Crenshaw, who I really enjoyed reading some of her articles doing my research. And she had this concept of the basement, and it's almost contrasting themes of the basement where people, the more social identity and intersectionality you have, the further in the basement you are. The further away from the hatch of admittance, which is where, in my case, in my study, is where white women are. So I was so impressed and struck by that whole notion that I'm not an image maker, but I did a PowerPoint diagram of this basement, the depiction of this basement, where at the very bottom, if you think of stair steps, at the very bottom, it's the darkest that it can get. It's black. The stair is thin. And let's give an example of a poor, black and brown, mixed race, disabled, lesbian, uneducated women. Then the next step as you go up, you take one of those away. It's a black and brown, mixed race, disabled, lesbian, uneducated woman. And as you go up the stairs get lighter. Now we're into gray, where it's black and brown, mixed race, disabled, lesbian women. And you go up, it's a little lighter, it's black and brown, mixed race, lesbian women. And up a little further is lighter, it's black and brown, mixed race women. And it's lighter even going toward the hatch of admittance of mixed race women. And then you have the hatch of admittance, and then you have white women. So you started at the basement, and you're trying to get out of the basement. And the more intersectionality that you have that is put on us by society, it's not how we were born. That's through colonization and oppression. But the further down you are, the harder it is to get up to the top. And that there's something wrong with that picture. Intersectionality should be great.
Yeah. I like to point out that it's like the more perspectives that we can get on any topic, like the more precise we're going to be able to see it, right? So, like I think this about this, you think that about it. Okay, we have two of us now. We might totally disagree because we're looking at it from two different sides, right? But we get like 100 people in here, and eventually the truest true thing would be if we had all 7.5 billion people looking at the thing, we would then get as close to human truth as we could, right?
Right.
It's getting crowded. But those who are living in this intersectional perspective have this, like, in a certain way, this like, extremely powerful understanding of like what is going on, right?
Yes.
And there's a certain level, I mean, almost with that ladder, it makes me think about like there's a certain level of just like blindness to the system as you get higher up, or if you start higher up, right? And
Right.
I mean, I
Well, that's our
remember,
problem right now. That's the
yeah,
problem.
right. I mean, as someone who has like, like middle upper class, like white man, US born, able bodied, cisgendered man, I like started right there at the top of that door of access. And literally the door is just like open for me whenever I want. And oftentimes people are like pushing me through the door, like you come on in, like, and it was a huge moment in my life to it was a moment in my life where I was working on a Green Party Senate campaign for Aaron Dixon, who was a Black Panther back in the day. And we were doing some campaign organizing, and I was like leading the volunteers because I was in the leadership position, as it happens. And this woman, this African American woman, Black woman, like was just like called me out for just like whatever, like for me, just like being just super entitled in front of everyone. And I was like, ouch. My girlfriend at the time, who's Colombian, was like, you know what, Duncan, like, I know that really hurt there, but you should listen to what she said. And because someone who who loved me was able to say, like, you better check your privilege there, buddy. I sat with it and ended up getting involved with like a lot of anti-racist work. And actually we actually went and had coffee, and she like talked to me about what it felt like to have me be doing that and to hear about her experience. And, she actually took the time to sort of point me in the direction of where I could learn about my privilege. And what was crazy was in this moment of realizing that was at the top of that ladder at the door of access, and that in my whole life, my whole life, I was just in charge of everything I ever did. And I was like, I just, because I'm awesome, because I'm a great leader, right? And it was like, maybe, but maybe not. And like, how much of this was just because I was just like started at the top. And it was intense because it ended up becoming this journey of actually own self-discovery that I had to like do the work to do, to be like, who am I actually as Duncan? Not like just what society was just handing to me. And I had to go and just like learn about like what were all the steps that were below me that I just had it. And in a way, I kind of turned myself off for a bit. Like there was like, I'm not sure if I deserve to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to like, in a way, I've been like, working myself back to like, let me see if I can just like find a way of like, to whatever degree, and it's not static, it's dynamic, it's a changing thing, but I had to like learn each of those steps, and like find out like who my
Well,
ancestors.
you had to learn and you had to unlearn. And, I
Yeah.
believe that there's shaming that happens. There's guilt, blame, shame that can be loaded onto some of this stuff. And I believe at some point it needs to be a level of forgiveness. There has to
Mm-hmm.
be some point where, and it's not excusing behavior. That doesn't mean you get away with behavior that is oppressive to somebody else. And there needs to be a point of reconciliation, I believe, in order to move forward, where you realize that I believe people do the best that they can with what they've got. How do we expect them to do more than that? Sure, you can try more, but
Mm-hmm.
you can start fresh and be willing and open to have your eyes opened more to learn more, whatever. But at the time, you're giving what you have, and then you can platform. You can bounce from there.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be this reconciliation. That's what I mean. You,
Yeah.
you, you mirrored it exactly the way I said it earlier, and the way I see this work is that it's some point of self-reflection that you take into inside yourself, where you come into this realization of whatever it is. In your case, this whole big thing. Oh my God! And then you have to like reconcile with that, and then be able to be clear on who you are and how you're going to show up, and then express that way to yourself first, because you owe that to yourself, and then express from that place out in the world. So then you're able to go apologize to somebody, or you're able to say, I want to be in solidarity with you, or show me, or whatever it is. That our movement these days is people are coming to a different a reckoning. This is what's happening today.
Yeah. And yeah, I'll just like say a million times, this is like self-forgiveness is the answer to almost every problem in the world. You have to start there, like, and there's something I've cried the tears of my trouble that my ancestors have caused. And there's something about being able to face it and then pick up from there. And because actually it was, do you know Armando?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was like a guest in the podcast in the back in the day. He's the one who actually called me out. He's like, Duncan, you being on your little pity party about being some sort of white man is like wasting time. Like, he was just like,
Get it
like,
together.
get it together, buddy. Like, we need you in the game here. Make the space, like, do what you need to do. And like, when I have a chance, I'll lift someone up. But I'm also learning to be me and trust that, like, when I make mistakes, I can do the repairs.
Well, that's all you can do. You can only do the best that you can. But that's part of the challenge. Some people aren't doing what they can. I have another theory in my work about, I'm toying with how to frame it. It's called, I think it's going to be Bring 100 theory. And that's for women of color is different than what we're talking about here. But to bring 100% of yourself, bring all of yourself that you can, even though you may only have 10% to bring. But if you bring 100% of the 10%, you're bringing all that you have and all that you are. And then, at some point when that increases to 100%, you strive to bring 100%, but, not many of us can bring 100% of who we are to it for a variety of reasons. There's layers that we have.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Like, bring 100% of whatever percent you can bring, because things really good. Yeah.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
Bring 100 theory, Reverend Sunshine Michelle Coleman, or Doctor.
Dr. Reverend. So there's this piece here about this rippling out, and just like, I appreciated that you were like, like that experience that I had is like an experience that like the kind of huge chunk of the country and the world is like going through this like reconciliation of like, oh man, we've been doing what? And I appreciate how you pointed out that this is like a time of like deep transformation. And I was like, how would you articulate like what this transformation, the moment that we're in, what you're seeing as possible or hoping is possible?
I love that question, Duncan. I love it. And from a fractal perspective, a quantum perspective, Sherry Mitchell calls it quantum entanglement, and my spiritual practitioner calls it quantum something else. Anyway, this is just all on my mind these days. I'm saturated in my work. But here's how I think about it. I alluded to it earlier. I believe in infinite possibility. I believe that what people call miracles are ordinary. It's ordinary actions. Miracles happen all the time. It's just that we choose to frame it as something that's extraordinary. So the way I see it and the way I'm praying into it, I don't know what the healing looks like or the transformation, but I know it needs to be quantum to heal this deep-seated stuff that has been going on, that has been uprooted. Our Thrive community hosted Akaya Winwood, and I'm waiting to actually have a conversation with her tomorrow, the air stopped when she said on that interview, and I quote it all the time, that's why I wanted to talk to her, is the taproot, this is her words, the taproot of patriarchy has just been uprooted from the ground. And when she said that, she was almost like, oh, and we were too on the call. And it's that. And it's like, it has been. I have to believe that it's being uprooted. I believe what she said, what she caught. And that as it's uprooted, she was imploring us to take a look at our own roots, because we've all lived in patriarchy, all of us, no matter what role. And is to examine those roots and make sure it's all uprooted. Roots can grow pretty deep. Uproot all that stuff. And then let the soil rest before we plant anything else. We don't want that patriarchal root to still be in there, and we're expecting roses and we get some other crap, right? But here's what I believe getting to that is that it can go poof, voila. Like poof, voila. Pandemic, right. People are getting better. Scientists can't explain, the medical profession can't explain. The numbers are going down. People are going home. We're able to lift the shelter, and we come with a new consciousness that people are governing differently. People are being kinder. They're being wiser. They're reduce, reuse, recycle. The earth is healing because of it. It can be in an instant. That's the transformation that I see. I don't have to know. What I always say is, I need to know the what. I don't have to know the how. So I know the what. I know the healing that I want to breathe into. This is what I'm signed up for. This is my purpose. Ancestors, angels, greater beings, divine, show me what I need to do. That's my prayer on my altar every day. Show me what I need to help me to see, help the claws to be removed from my eyes, help me to hear from clear vision, clear hearing, clear heart, help me to reconcile, to atone, help me to do what I need to do, help all of us to do that. And then it will be what it needs to be. That's how I see transformation. It can happen, poof, voila, just like that.
Yeah, another nugget of wisdom that I got recently is that, like, yeah, about this idea, like the transformation can happen instantly, and that, like, when we're thinking about intention, this isn't like, it's not something that's like out there that we're like, oh, we'll get there someday. But it's like, can we recognize that, like, right here, right now, we have all the solutions to all of our problems right at our hands, and as soon as we accept that, then we are building the new future, right? Like, it's like, and it's, I mean, and like, and I appreciate again, like the fractal quantum, like, like aspect of this. It's like, with myself, like, I am already the man that I want to be. Like, can I just, like, I can just decide I'm going to be that man, and I could start being that man right now. Right. And same thing, like, we, as humanity, like America, like, we have the idea we want it to be, like, let's do it. There is, like, something so rich about this moment with just, like, it's like both, like, the level of attention that is being put on, like, the challenges in the world, and just things are just laid bare. And also we're just in this natural reset moment, given the coronavirus and given the, like, all the things. It's like, we could just wake up right now. And we want to do that. I had another friend say, like, it's just the same thing about, like, finding your personal expression, and the same thing about finding our, like, highest humanity expression. It's like, you can make it as hard as you want to be.
Right?
Yeah, you want to make that hard? Go ahead. Yeah,
I
like,
tell you, it's all about choice.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be as miserable or as happy as you want. And here's another thing, Duncan. It's controversial even for me, and I'm still working with it. And some of me doesn't know how to, but I know that I need to as a spiritual leader. And that is ultimate forgiveness. So how is it that I, as a Black woman whose ancestors in current day, like the KKK, are hanging in full order and have been doing this stuff all the time, how do I forgive them? How do I recognize that, if I see you in oneness, then I've got to see them in oneness? How do I bring myself to that? I don't have the answer for it, but I know that I have to do it. This is something I think we have to kind of come to. How do we embrace and love? And many of us are trying to do that it's all about love. It doesn't mean that we forgive that behavior that you did over there, but we have to. It's almost like I mentioned sci-fi earlier with Star Wars, the Darth Vader character. But underneath there was a man. And, there's always that part of the Force. It's like the opposite sides of the continuum. There's fear on one side, there's faith on the other. It's a matter of where you turn your attention. So in that movie, the attention was turned, the Force was used over in that direction, and it became, I don't want to mystify darkness, because there's darkness can be fertile and gray, so it has been, kind of capitalized in a different direction. But, that darkness went down the rabbit hole, but there was always those semblance of light. They could always hear, they were always tormented by the right side, the space of love that tormented them. So it's a matter of choice.
Something that's kind of coming together for me right now. First of all, it was another woman who spoke at Thrive once, where she says, like, every day I am praying to the little beautiful unicorn spirit inside of Donald Trump. And that, I just love it when she said that. It's like, and everyone.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Like, exactly. Darth Vader has this little beautiful little rainbow unicorn spirit, and what I was thinking is you're talking about this idea of, like, ultimate forgiveness. Like, how do I forgive the person who's, like, actively fighting for white supremacy out there, and all the history of just rape and oppression and just destruction. And I mean, for me, it comes back to this piece about, like, where it starts with self-forgiveness. Like, there's something about, just like we know that there's the rainbow unicorn spirit inside of, Darth Vader, and can we recognize that nugget of oppression and anger, and wanting to take control and wanting to defend our power inside of ourselves, and forgive that little, and maybe it's small, but like, can we see the darkness in ourselves and say, I forgive that? Like, it seems like that's like a step here. And I use this quote all the time. Like, there's Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote about the Gulag Archipelago, about the Stalinistic times, and like massive concentration camps. And he had this quote like, "Wouldn't it be great if there were just evil people in the world, and all we had to do was just separate them from the rest of society, and all of our problems would be solved?" But the truth is that the line between good and evil cuts through every one of our hearts, and no one wants to cut away a part of their own heart. And then I think that also it has to do with all that levels of like work and capacity. If you're not ready to go forgive the little unicorn spirit, and or like, if someone's not ready to do that for someone for whatever reason, that's okay. That maybe that's not on you to go out there and find the forgiveness. It's a quicker path for me. I know my family owned slaves. I know that my forefathers participated in oppression of women. And I also know that if I go back far enough, that there was a time where someone came and did that to my people. But so it's a quicker path for me to find, like I only have to go back a little bit to have to need to find the part of me that, I gotta go back a couple of years, like the last week, before I could find the part of me that's taking advantage of my privilege and that I have, and or benefiting from racism. But then recognizing that, like, can I forgive that dark seed inside of me? And then, like, how does that then help me?
Well, I like what you're saying, Duncan, is because, to the degree that I'm healing it in myself, I recognize that it's being healed within you. And I think it speaks to, it's the reconciliation that I talked about, that self-reflection. When you can reconcile for yourself, then you can stand on your own, in your own power, and do what you know is right. If I see somebody in front of me in the store drop a $20 bill, it's on me that if I go scoop it up and stick it in my pocket, nobody saw me. Or do I say, excuse me, you dropped this? There's no question for me. I know what I would do. And there's some people who, and do you allow that to happen? And can you forgive yourself when you later said, oh my gosh, I took that $20 bill and I should have told it? It's a matter of that forgiveness. And then it has a vibrational healing resonance. That's what I was talking about earlier, that to the degree that we can do that, and we're talking together, you and I, and we're putting these things on the table about your ancestors who owned slaves, and I'm telling you about my stuff, and we're having this heart to heart, and it's rippling out. I believe that this helps, to the degree that we help ourselves become more conscious and more aware. It helps my ancestors to, for their whole space to be reconciled and to be healed. It helps set the pathway for the future generations. This is an indigenous wisdom of the 7 generations, that we're setting the stage for our future generations to be able to live in a world that does work for all and that does have something left, because we were able to reconcile with it. They can look back and say, oh my God, look at the atrocities. But then they can also say, look at the healing work that they did. They did some transformational work for us.
Yeah. I just very moved by the idea of can I live my life in such a way that, again, 7 generations out, 1,000 years out, 10,000 years out, that people can look back and go, holy smokes, wow, the world was getting crazy in 2020 is what they used to call it back then, and everyone the world got all globalized and all connected on the internet, and they're about to brink of economic catastrophe, environmental collapse and economic catastrophe. And wow, they pulled it off for us.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing, and can we live our life in the way that, just like that you and I can look back at our ancestors and be like, wow, thank you for letting me be here.
Yeah, which I thank them for every day. Every day, every morning in the shower, I am giving thanks that I have an inside toilet, because some of my ancestors didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And that I bless them for the pathway that they walked that helped me to be where I am today.
Yeah.
And that I might make them proud that I am walking a pathway that they're helping to guide me on, that I'm listening to, that I'm moving forward in.
Totally. So, Michelle, a question that I ask all the guests on the show is, given your life experience, what is something that you might invite people to pay attention to as they are trying to make a better life for themselves and the world?
I would say is to ask the questions and to listen. And it's not just asking of another person. To ask out into the ethers, to ask whatever your divine connection is, and to listen and to act on that. One of my favorite, I don't even know how long ago it's been. It's kind of like more than an affirmation. It's kind of like a way of living now for me, or it used to be an intention statement, but it is. I hear and act upon my divine inner messages without hesitation. I hear and act upon my divine inner messages without hesitation. And if we are attuned to that, whatever that means for us, that's the atheist, that's the agnostic, that's the people who feel like they don't have any divine connection or whatever. They know they didn't make themselves. They have their own theory about how they got here or how the world exists. But just to open up the space of connection, to say, what is mine to do? Mm-hmm. What would you have me to do? What is it mine to do? And to listen, and to do the spiritual practices to listen more deeply. We have to be attuned because it's so noisy outside, and some of us are not well practiced to be able to listen and to hear. And then to follow that nudge when you hear it. I happen to get downloads when I sleep, or I get these downloads like the poetry or whatever, and sometimes it's a little whisper. But I've attuned myself, and I'm so well practiced now, when I get the whisper, I just do it. Yeah, you do it. You don't have to know why. Just do it, because that's the listen. Mm-hmm. That's what we need today, for everybody to listen and to be honest. It's all about authentic self-expression for me, Duncan. It's about being genuine, being honest, being true. And if we are in knowing your connection, then we're going to make the world a better place.
Ask the question, listen, and then do whatever it is you
enact it.
Yeah, do it.
That's the hard part. Without hesitation, it's because you're driving down the street. You drive the same way home every day. You hear a little voice that says, "Turn right here." You say, "Oh no, I'm not going to do that because this is the quicker way." You hear it. You may hear it again at the next street. No, I'm going to go this way, and then you run into this big accident, and you're late for your appointment. Mm-hmm. And what's the first thing you say? I knew I should have followed that voice.
Yeah.
We don't know. We think we know. That's part of our problem. We have thought we've known so much that we have got ourselves in horrible trouble.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that example because in our day-to-day and our swirl, and plus with just all the distractions in the world, but just especially when we're also getting into like routines and we're on our tunnel vision, it's like easy to like not listen to those voices because we just can't even hear it and all the static that's going on. There are times when I was traveling, where I'm like in a place, it's like a new city. There's like no one I know that knows what I'm doing and I have no plan. Those are the times where I could like dial in to that voice because I'm like not in my routine, in all these places. Actually, you appreciate this. Like that was a huge part of how I was able to do my master's thesis. I went to there's these mining conflicts happening in Argentina. It's like I went out and I'm like, where am I going to find the people who I needed to talk to? And I just like sat there and I was like literally at a crossroads. And do I go here? Do I go there? And I go off this dirt road and like found this person and, ended up becoming this huge part of my work because I had to just listen to the whispers. We're back to listening to the whispers again.
You didn't have it. Well, there's always choice, but you were forced into a state of surrender because you were in a place that you didn't know you didn't have anything else to do. I think
exactly.
The point is that in this place where we think we know everything and where we're used to the hustle and bustle of life, and we're in pandemic.
Yeah.
So we're in a whole nother time right now.
Right. I mean, it's like right now, I'm just like, in my, I have my rest of my day planned, but like right now, walking around my house with the idea of what I'm going to do for the next couple hours, what would it take for me to listen to the whisper that says, you just take that book off the shelf and read it right now, or, whatever it is.
Or so-and-so comes in your mind. This is what I do. Somebody hits my mind, I will stop right then and call them. And more than not, they will say, I was just thinking about you, or you've been on my mind, or so-and-so is happening, or this is happening. And if I'm so dialed in, they say, wow. Now they'll be like, I am not surprised you called me.
Yeah.
Because they know I'm known that I follow that voice. That voice will lead you to gold.
Well, I'll really pay attention to that. That's what definitely the calling people. It's a good one. If people want to find out more about you, or is there a way that they can find your stuff?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And what I didn't mention is I have a faith-based nonprofit called Authenticity Journey of Renewal. So I can be reached through www.authenticityjourney.org. There's a contact page there, and that's the best way right now. But stay tuned, because Reverend Dr. Diva, as I'm known, has stuff coming down the pike. So I should be able to be found if you want to find me.
Excellent. Just listen. And also say that, like, anyone who's listening to this, like, as usual, I make a little whole resource page, based on the things we talked about here today. So anything that people heard us talk about, if you want to learn more about it, you can also find it at fractalfriends.us. Wow, this has been so great.
I've had a blast. Thank you, Duncan, for the invitation. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Fractal Friends with Sunshine Michelle Coleman. You can find more content, links, and resources about this episode, as well as other episodes, at fractalfriends.us. And while you're there, sign up for the newsletter so you can get updates on new episodes and learn more about my work as the Chief Transformation Officer at Spoke and Wheel. Please consider donating to Fractal Friends or subscribing to be a patron. You can find buttons for that on the website. You can find out more about Sunshine Michelle at authenticityjourney.org. And you can learn more about me, Duncan Autry, at duncanautry.com. If you like this episode, please take a moment to share it with someone. Text it to a friend or post it on Facebook, or you can send an email to a whole bunch of folks. I'm doing my part to amplify these voices, and I would love to have your support in spreading the word. And as usual, I'll close this out with a song. This song is called We Survived, and it's by Climbing Poetry. That's spelled with 2 E's, like a tree. This duo of amazing women, Alexa and Naima, are probably my favorite revolutionary transformational artists. If you don't know them yet, you need to check them out. And one way to do that is to check out the music video for this song, which you can find on the episode page at fractalfriends.us or at climbingpoetry.com. That's POETREE.com. And the reason for choosing this song is about to come obvious. I'll say this, though. Our ancestors are rooting for us. Expect miracles. We will survive. Our descendants are counting on us. It is our sacred duty. We must survive. We all have a role to play in the whole. Thank you for listening to Fractal Friends.
Of Selma and Nagasaki, and we will survive Palestine. We survived Vietnam and Rwanda and Mississippi. The 50 stripes around our stars, 50 years to life behind their bars. We survived middle school and self-inflicted scars, losing our mothers to our fathers' hands. We survived slavery and genocide, came back from the dead and spread like wildfire. Police beatings, the screams and the echoes, the cutbacks, the evictions, the droughts and the prisons, Jim Crow and gas chambers for warfare and lynching. The seeds from our strange fruit been sprinkled across this terrain by our angels. And everywhere we land, we're gonna take root. And every inch of rock, mud, and sand, we're gonna break through. You're here right now. I'm I'm seeing you with my own two eyes. Think of all the demons that tried to take you, and you still survived. And we will survive. To annihilate our angels, we summon the strength of all those who came before us, and all those coming. We must free freedom in our fingers when the world gives us nothing but believing a new day.